Dawn Treader Stories present. Something lost and found in Baguio. It was a damp, misty morning in Baguio, and everything smelled of pine and rain-soaked earth. The clouds hung low, draping the hills, and the streets bustled quietly, as they often did in October. At the far end of Session Road, tucked between a pottery shop and a plant store, stood a quaint, wood-paneled coffee shop called Sagada Brews. Inside, two figures sat across from each other in the soft warmth of the cafe's amber light. Nico had not meant to stay so long. He only came in for a quick coffee, hoping to escape the drizzle and maybe read a few pages of Anna Karenina, a book he liked to carry around, though it weighed down his bag and his mood alike. But now, he was lingering far too long, drawn in by the conversation of an older man named Manuel, who had taken the seat across from him, uninvited but disarmingly polite. Manuel had the slow, steady voice of someone who always knew what to say, charming without trying. He was in his early 40s, with a salt and pepper beard, a slim build, and eyes that spoke of things left unsaid for too long. Nico was 22, tall and awkward, with a habit of fiddling with the sleeves of his jacket when he was nervous. His university friends called him a dreamer, but he sometimes suspected they meant naive. He didn't mind. It was better than being cynical. Manuel had noticed the book in Nico's hands when he walked in. Tolstoy, he had said, ordering a flat white and settling into the wooden chair. Nico had smiled shyly, brushing raindrops from his hair. Yeah. I like the way he writes about people, how complicated they are. Sad, but beautiful too. Manuel nodded knowingly, as though they shared a secret. Tolstoy always had a way of finding beauty in sadness. That's the trick, I think. And so their conversation began, first about books, then about life, as these things tend to unfold when two strangers with a shared loneliness meet. The cafe, with its quiet buzz of rain and mellow jazz playing from the speakers, became a world apart from the grayness outside. Manuel spoke with a kind of ease that made Nico feel seen, like the words they exchanged had been waiting somewhere in the air, waiting to find the right listener. He spoke about the past, about how love could bloom at the wrong time and wilt just when it was most needed. About mistakes he'd made, people he had loved and let go, because sometimes that was all you could do. His words hung like the mist outside, lingering long after they were spoken. Nico listened intently, drawn in by the cadence of Manuel's voice. He felt like someone reading a letter written in a language he hadn't fully mastered but recognized nonetheless, a letter that spoke to a part of himself he didn't quite understand yet. There was something in Manuel's presence, in the way he looked at Nico, that made him feel both uncomfortably exposed and strangely at ease. Do you believe in second chances? Nico asked suddenly, surprising himself with the question. Manuel smiled sadly, almost wistfully. I think life offers them, but not always when we expect. Sometimes we get a second chance after we've stopped believing we deserve it. Nico thought of the boy he used to sit next to in literature class, the one who smiled too easily and whom he never had the courage to ask out. He wondered what it would have felt like to lean in, just once, and let himself be seen for who he was. The rain outside thickened, tapping gently against the windows, as though it, too, wanted to join their conversation. A barista, a young woman with a high ponytail and tired eyes, brought over their coffee. Nico stirred his Americano slowly, watching the swirl of cream dissolve into the dark liquid. Have you ever, Nico hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question. Have you ever felt like you missed a chance to tell someone something important? Manuel didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip of his coffee, then leaned back in his chair, as though gathering his thoughts. There was someone, he said at last, his voice softer now. A long time ago. He was kind. Like you in a way. But I was younger then. Too afraid to say what I really wanted. Nico swallowed, his heart thudding in his chest. He knew, without Manuel needing to say it outright, what that unspoken truth had been. And suddenly, it felt like they were no longer talking about the past or about Tolstoy. It felt like they were talking about them. The air between them thickened with an unsaid understanding, a silent acknowledgement of something delicate, fragile, and fleeting. Nico felt a strange pull in his chest, a longing he couldn't quite name. It scared him a little, but it also made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Outside, the rain drummed steadily on the roof, a reminder that time was slipping away, as it always did. Nico knew, deep down, that their moment together, whatever it was, would not last. People like Manuel didn't linger in the lives of people like him. They were like the rain, brief, beautiful, and destined to pass. But still, something in him ached to hold on, just for a little while longer. "What would you say," Nico asked quietly, "if you had the chance to say it now?" Manuel looked at him, his gaze steady but gentle. For a moment, the cafe seemed to fall silent, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Then Manuel reached across the table, his hand brushing lightly against Nico's, just for a second, just long enough to say everything he couldn't put into words. "I'd say," Manuel began, his voice barely above a whisper, "that sometimes it's okay to want something. Even if it doesn't make sense." Nico's heart raced. For a moment, he imagined leaning across the table, imagined the warmth of Manuel's hand in his, the feel of his breath close against his skin. But he didn't move. He only smiled softly, shyly, but with a kind of quiet courage he hadn't known he possessed. The moment passed as all moments do. But something lingered between them, something tender and bittersweet, like the final note of a song that stays with you long after the music has stopped. Manuel glanced at his watch and sighed. "I should go," he said, though there was a reluctance in his voice that made Nico's chest tighten. Nico nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yeah. Me too." They stood together, their chairs scraping softly against the wooden floor. Manuel gave Nico one last smile, a smile that held 1,000 unspoken things, and then turned toward the door. As Manuel stepped out into the rain, Nico watched him disappear into the mist, his figure fading into the gray like a character from one of Tolstoy's novels, someone who had passed through his life briefly, leaving behind only the memory of a moment that was both fleeting and unforgettable. Nico stood there for a while, listening to the rain, feeling the warmth of Manuel's touch lingering on his skin. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He reached into his bag, pulled out his worn copy of Anna Karenina, and smiled to himself. Maybe, just maybe, life was offering him a second chance, not with Manuel, but with himself. And maybe that was enough. The end. Please subscribe for more stories like this.